Well, looks like we're going to talk about goaltending again, so that's what we're going to do on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jacket, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Talking about goaltending again today on Locked On Blue Jackets. It is a topic that comes up probably, honestly, more often than I would like it to. You know that I love to talk about goalies. I hate to talk about when the goalies are problems. And unfortunately, we get to talk about the second one today, which is I was going to do like a player review. I was going to talk about Dmitry Ronkov. It was going to be fun. We were going to talk about what kind of new contract it might look like, whether he was going to score 20 goals again next season. It was going to be fun. And then I was just kind of floating around on Twitter, as one does, and saw an article that I believe was translated from a Russian interview. And the gist of it was Daniil Tarasov is, as far as he's concerned, playing in the NHL next season and more than likely playing for the Blue Jackets, right? Which surprised me a little bit. But it sounds like his agent is talking to the team. It sounds like they've had preliminary conversations. He is not entertaining, going to the KHL. It really sounds like, the plan is to work something out in Columbus, which kind of took me by surprise, let's say. I think it probably surprised a lot of people. Now, I will say, not a lot of, I don't think any of this has been, confirmed or, retweeted or whatever by any, actual news source in the Columbus, media sphere. I haven't really seen Portline talking about it. Obviously the team hasn't mentioned anything, but, there's no, none of the big media has really latched onto this. And that kind of makes sense. It's the backup goalie or potentially your third string goalie, right? But I wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit because if this does happen, then I am curious about what the plan is for the rest of everything, really, because here's the thing. The Blue Jackets exceeded expectations this year, right? I think, everyone is aware of that. I know that the organization has, come out and said, well, we don't consider this year a success because we didn't make the playoffs, and we thought we were going to make the playoffs, and we wanted to make the playoffs. So, yeah, this year is not the success that we wanted. And, okay, fine, you have to say that. But, the fact of the matter is the Blue Jackets took steps forward this year. Unfortunately, you need to take more than one step forward, right? And I've talked about this a lot kind of when it comes to the defense, specifically if you want to retool the defense, but you also want to bring back both Fabro and Provorov, and we're not going to talk about that in this episode, but you can't do both of those things, right? And there was an article on The Athletic by Aaron Portzline where it was kind of a roundup of things, right? And he basically just looked at how likely, the UFAs, etc., are to come back. But in it, he also mentioned, that the organization is keeping it very kind of hush-hush, but there is a sense that they want to make sweeping changes in goal, I believe was the exact, maybe not the exact quote, but that's essentially what the quote was, right? But then on the other hand, you've got this report that they're in conversations with Tarasov about bringing Daniil Tarasov back. And, Elvis's contract is Elvis's contract. I don't really think that that's a movable contract. I might be wrong. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again, but it all feels a little bit suspicious, let's say. Now, again, I do want to re-clarify that all of this is coming from Tarasov's side of things, right? So is this him and his agent manufacturing interest, perhaps, of saying, oh, well, there are teams like I'm in conversations with Columbus. They think I could be an NHL goalie. He went on to say that obviously he had a tough year, but he thought that he, started to pull it back. Had some good moments, had some bad moments. Never held it against Jet Greaves for taking over, or overtaking, I guess. When Elvis was down with the concussion at the end of the year there, which again, like, still is the biggest thing for me is playoffs are on the line. Your, for better or worse, starting goalie is unavailable. Instead of playing your backup goalie, you call up your AHL goalie and play him for 6 straight games, including 4 games in 5 nights. One of those was an AHL game, but Wednesday night, AHL game. Thursday night, NHL game. Friday, off. Saturday, game. Sunday, game. Monday, off. Tuesday, game. Like, what's that? 7 games in 8 nights or something? Like, or 7 games in 9 nights? Like, just a truly ridiculous amount of hockey to put on ostensibly an unproven goalie, right? So the fact that Tarasov seems okay with that surprises me. But I don't know, like it felt to me a lot like the writing was on the wall, and I think a lot of people have kind of assumed that the writing was on the wall, because again, why would you do that if you have literally any faith at all in Tarasov? And it really sounds to me like the organization doesn't. So I do wonder how much of this is Tarasov wants to be a Blue Jacket and they're trying to work something out. Like there is a world here where, Daniil Tarasov is the 3rd string goalie and they put him on waivers. I think that's a risk that they can take, especially, the beginning of the season, kind of what is it, like the end of preseason. I don't remember what the exact date is, but there's a time about the end of preseason before the regular season starts where they've got to be cap compliant, and anyone that you want to send down, you've got to put on waivers, right? And, not necessarily you have to do that before the regular season starts, but that's when the Blue Jackets picked up Zach Aston Reese last year, was I think the Golden Knights put him on waivers. Blue Jackets swooped in, took him, and now he's ours. But there are a lot of players on waivers in that kind of 3-4 day period, right? So here is my thought on that. Is this an insurance signing potentially? If it is, I'm not sure I understand it. But here is my kind of my vague thought for how this works out if they do end up bringing Daniil Tarasov back, right? Is Jet Greaves is 23 years old, has about 20 NHL games to his name, if that. I think he played 11 this season, played about 4 last season, and played 1 the season before that. So what's that, like 16, 17? I don't even think he's broken the 20-game mark yet. That is a very, very shiny, brand new basket to put a lot of eggs in. And if you don't know how heavy the eggs are, like, it makes sense to have someone like to have an NHL guy waiting in the wings potentially, right? So I wonder if the thought is they re-signed Daniil Tarasov for cheap. I don't know off the top of my head. Okay, so I know how one-way and two-way contracts work, right? And just in case people don't know, we'll clarify them again. It's not to do with whether you can play in either league. A one-way contract just means that you are paid the same amount of money as you are in the NHL and the AHL, right? Two-way contract means that you are paid an amount of money in the NHL and you are paid a different amount of money in the AHL. So typically that's for, guys like, if I can pull up the Blue Jackets page real quick, I believe Jake Christensen is on a one-way contract at the minute, but was on a two-way contract previously. So his his previous contract, just again for clarity's sake, was a 1-year, two-way contract. So in the NHL, he was making $775,000 in the NHL. In the AHL, he was making $275,000, so about a third of his actual hit. Usually it's much less than that. It'll be they make 900 in the NHL, and then they make, about 100 in the AHL, give or take. And again, if you go back to ELC specifically, it's usually about $925,000 in the NHL, and Jay Christensen made $70,000 in the AHL during the length of his ELC. So basically what that means is a player makes, if they think a player is going to be bouncing between the two leagues, they can give him a two-way contract and they will get paid an amount of money, like more money in the NHL and less money in the AHL. Once you have signed a one-way contract, I'm not sure what the rules are on going back and signing a two-way contract after that. So because Daniil Tarasov right now has been on a one-way contract, I'm 95% sure. Where is it? Yeah, so he's been making this, whether he would have been in the NHL or the AHL, his contract will have cost them the same amount of money. So even if, what this means basically is it's a lot easier to bury a salary if they're on a two-way contract. If they're on a one-way contract, Tarasov wasn't making a ton of money, and the Blue Jackets have cap space to spare. So if they had to bury him, it's fine. But, for example, Jack Campbell, who went from Edmonton to, I believe, to LA and then over to Philly, or went from LA to Edmonton to Philly, and they put him on waivers and sent him down. He's getting paid basically that full $5 million. I think he's with Bakersfield now. I don't know. The point I'm making here is, if they can sign Daniil Tarasov either to a low contract or a two-way contract, which will probably still be a low contract, if you can get him signed for under $1 million, like a show me type contract potentially, it feels like there's very little risk in throwing him on waivers, and then, oh no, you have a guy who has had success at the AHL level. And worst case scenario, if you need to yank him up because either Greaves isn't ready or whoever's backing up, whether that's Elvis, whoever, Daniil Tarasov has played in the NHL, right? He has put forth some quite good performances at the NHL level. I know, I've seen it, right? But if he ends up being a guy that's, is your veteran option in the AHL, your, push button in case of emergency guy, that to me feels not the worst situation in the world, right? And that to me is really the only kind of situation I can see with Daniil Tarasov. We'll take a quick break. We'll run through a couple of the other situations with Tarasov, but to me, just to kind of wrap that all up, really the thing that makes the most sense to me is if they re-sign him, throw him on waivers, keep him in the AHL, break glass in case of emergency, and, again, if Jet's not ready, then they've got a guy. They don't have to try and retool the room on the fly. Now, I don't think that this is an option if they want to really take steps forward next season, because surely they can get a veteran guy to basically do the same thing as Daniil Tarasov for better. Because let's face it, Daniil Tarasov was not very good this season. Was fine last season, was not good the season before that, was good in his first season. He's a real up and down kind of player. So surely they can find someone a little bit more consistent, because that's been the issue with the Blue Jackets goaltending for basically the last forever, is consistency. But take a quick break, and when we get back, I've got a couple of other options for how this could work if indeed Daniil Tarasov does return to Columbus. First, I've got to tell you about Game Time, because there's nothing like playoff hockey, right? Energy, rivalry, non-stop action. The Stanley Cup players are heating up, and there's never been a better time to see it live, and Game Time makes getting in the building fast and affordable. They give you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals for deep discounts, panoramic seat views, and, my favorite bit, all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, ticket prices often drop the closer you get to puck drops. You can score big without overpaying. I can't tell you how many times last season I was in California, I would finish work, my partner would finish work, and we'd be like, hey, we've got nothing to do tonight. Let's go see a Sharks game. We paid about $19 because the Sharks were real bad. And, we'd finish work at 4, 5 p.m. And by 6:30, we are in the arena waiting for the game to start. So that, to me, is the best way to do hockey tickets. And I got all my tickets from Game Time. It is a life hack for getting incredible tickets on the fly. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about goalies, but not like the fun goalie talk, unfortunately. We are talking about what happens if the Blue Jackets decide to randomly just kind of bring Daniil Tarasov back. Obviously, this is not the ideal anything, really. And I think a lot of people, myself included, have kind of been working on the assumption that he is like just so gone, right? He was unwatchable for large parts of the season. He lost his job at the end of the season to an AHL guy that had played the night before and also who played back-to-back games. Like, again, the Blue Jackets had that back-to-back against Washington to, like, almost close out the season, and Jet Greaves played in both of those games, right? So you had to think the writing was on the wall for Daniil Tarasov. Apparently the writing might not be as on the wall as we thought. We talked in the first kind of segment a little bit about, like, is this some kind of weird galaxy brain way of finding a goalie that's familiar with the team and sneaking him into the AHL where he can hopefully be a pretty solid AHL guy. The Monsters don't currently have any goalie under contract, I'm pretty sure. Sounds like Sergei Ivanov is staying in Russia. Pavel Chayan has gone back to Czechia. Evan Gardner is not old enough yet. Jet Greaves will be with the Blue Jackets, and Zach Sawchenko is a pending UFA. So, like, he might be back, but as of right now, the Blue Jackets don't have a goalie next season for the Cleveland Monsters. Daniil Tarasov, I think, would be a very good option for the Cleveland Monsters. It allows him to stay with the organization. There's a chance that he can, work his way back. I personally think, and this is something that I've talked about a lot, throughout the season and in kind of the post-season wrap-up stuff, Elvis Merzlikins is a guy that gets tired easily and gets really fatigued easily. Daniil Tarasov is a guy that plays better the more he plays. And for some reason, the Blue Jackets decided that what the best way to do was to overplay the guy who suffers from fatigue and to barely play the guy that gets really rusty and is not like Daniil Tarasov is not a good backup. I don't know that he is an HL caliber starter, but I do think that the best way for him to refine his game is to go to the AHL and play approximately a bajillion minutes for the Monsters. And, that to me, he's not, ancient. He's 26 years old. This is not, an old Yeller situation where, he's going to get taken out back and shot. I really do think the AHL might allow him to refine his game because, again, you see flashes of there's a goalie in there somewhere, right? We've seen it at times, not all that often this season, but when he's on his game, he's really on his game, right? And I do think it is just a repetition thing. The more he plays, the better he gets. Put him in the AHL, let him play, 50 games or whatever, and then reevaluate at the end of the year. Here's the other option, which is an option that I like much less. And that is somehow they get rid of Elvis, right? Whether that's they trade him, whether that's they buy him out, whether that's they just delete him from the cap and pretend that he never existed. Like, just eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, everyone, about it. Having a tandem of Jet and Tarasov feels like something the Blue Jackets might try to make work, and I don't love that. Tarasov was a worse goalie this year than Elvis was. So in terms of goals saved above goals saved above expected per 60. So we've talked a lot about goals saved above expected. It's, how many goals should you have saved versus how many goals you actually saved, right? So Jet Greaves was right at the top of the league with this very, very small sample size. But Elvis basically allowed 8 more goals than he should have. Tarasov allowed 4 more goals than he should have. Was expected to allow about 60 and a half, ended up allowing 65. Now, Tarasov played fewer than half the games of Elvis, so that's why I like to look at goals saved above expected per 60, because basically that takes, it's basically GAA, but a little bit fancier, right? So per game, Daniil Tarasov had a goal saved above expected of minus 0.24. Elvis only slightly better at minus 0.155. However, based on this stat, there were only 12 goalies in the league that played at least 20 games that were worse than Daniil Tarasov. Jonathan Quick, Calvin Pickard, Justus Anunen, Marc-Andre Fleury, Vitek Vanacek, David Rittich, Alexander Georgiev, Peter Mrazek, Samuel Ersson, Ivan Fedotov, Connor Ingram, Philip Grubauer. Philip Grubauer, by the way, statistically the worst goalie in the league this season, which is wild. What happened to him? But only 12 goalies had a poorer performance than Tarasov. Now, for clarification, Elvis is only a couple spots above them, separated by Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Jeremy Swayman, who really had a down year this season. But Daniil Tarasov was not good this year. He was statistically the worst Blue Jackets goalie, and putting him as the backup role for Jet Greaves, especially if you think that Jet Greaves is going to play the lion's share of the games, if Jet Greaves thinks that he is going to play 45 to 50 games, then all you're doing is just kind of repeating what happened with Tarasov this year, which is he barely played, and he was a worse goalie because of it. So it all goes back to kind of what I said at the beginning here, is Tarasov needs to play to find him, to find his game again. And, whether that's one of those weird intangibles that people don't really like. Sometimes a goalie, like, goaltending is so mental, right? Like, both in terms of it's mentally tough and also it's just kind of unhinged. But sometimes a guy needs to go somewhere and just play a bunch of, I was going to say low stress hockey. I think the AHL is lower stress than the NHL, but probably not by much, right? But if they can get Daniil Tarasov significant playing time in the AHL, then that to me feels like a much better option than sticking him as the backup to Jet Greaves, because all that's really going to do is recreate this season where he plays once every 2 or 3 weeks and is god awful because he is rusty as hell. And that to me is not, like, that's not the option. That shouldn't be the option. And I'm kind of just trying to decide if that option, like, if you had to, for whatever reason, again, we're doing thought experiments here at Locked On Blue Jackets. Jet Greaves is the starter next season. Let's just go ahead and say that for the purposes of this experiment, Jet Greaves is the starter. You have 3 options then. You have Elvis as the backup. You have Tarasov as the backup. You get rid of both of them. One of these options involves keeping Tarasov. Obviously, I haven't talked about the situation where they sign him and he goes down to the minors, etc., etc. But, like, the other option is you get rid of Elvis. Like, so the options are you get rid of Elvis and keep Tarasov. You get rid of Tarasov and keep Elvis. There is a 4th option that I haven't mentioned here. And it is the most insane option, and that is, what if they just run back the same goaltending that they had this season? And I want to talk about how much of a terrible idea that is in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I've got to tell you about Indeed, because You just realized that your business needed to hire someone yesterday. But how can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidate faster. I've been lucky enough that I haven't had to job hunt for a while now, but when I was job hunting, Indeed was the only site I used. You need a job yesterday, the pressure is on, and I have seen all of the sponsored jobs pop up, and those ones are the ones that you pay attention to, right? So you can speed up your hiring process right now with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about goaltending. Again, forever. We're going to be talking about goaltending until the heat death of the universe, probably. But I've talked through a couple of things. Apparently, Daniil Tarasov is in conversations with extending in Columbus. I don't know how likely this is. And, if it is likely, then, we've talked through a couple of options. From my personal favorite to one that doesn't make a lot of sense. And now we're going to talk about the worst possible one, which is, what happens if they just decide to run back the same goaltending this year? Like, Jet Greaves is waivers eligible still, so he can go back down to the minors without having to go through waivers, which is useful if he is not, in fact, ready for the NHL starter role, which I think he might be, but that's a whole other conversation that we'll have. We've had several times, and we'll probably have again. For whatever reason, the goalie market isn't there. They keep Elvis, they keep Tarasov. This feels like the worst case scenario. Like, this feels like throwing in the towel before the season's even started, right? And I know that Don Waddell is a different GM to Jarmo Kekalainen, right? And one of the reasons that he's a different GM is that there are way less organizational leaks this year. And maybe that's like recency bias on my part, but I feel like in previous seasons, we've seen rumors up, just out the absolute butt about, Columbus is going to do this, Columbus is going to do that, Columbus is considering this, Columbus is considering that. And I feel like I've heard way fewer of those like this year. And that's kind of nice. It's difficult because it makes my job a lot harder if I've got nothing to dig into. But it is kind of nice, realizing that, maybe the leaks were because of Kekalainen, right? And Don Waddell, for better or worse, keeps his cards close to his chest. I do put some stock in the reporting from Aaron Portzline that the sense is that the organization is ready to make changes in goal. But, Don Waddell has come out and said, we're gonna look at what the best solution in goal is. And if the best solution in goal ends up being, running the same goaltending back this season that we had last season, then we'll do that. And to me, that feels a little bit like lip service, right? I can't possibly imagine that the organization is happy with how the goaltending was this season, right? Elvis was great and also unplayable on a nightly basis, right? He was, and I've said it so many times on this podcast, say it with me, feast or famine with Elvis. Tarasov was getting wins, but also was not playing well, right? Like, even in the beginning where, he played some of his better hockey towards the end of the season, I think, but like, his first 2 games of the season, he won both of them and allowed 4 goals on 54 shots between the 2 games. Like, they won against Colorado 6-4. They won against Buffalo 6-4, right? They went into Minnesota and lost. He made, he had a 9-12. It looks like he was just not, like, again, he had some good games, some not so good games. That shutout against New York, where they ended up losing in a shootout, was a particular highlight of mine, I thought. There was a game early on where he was, where is it? Oh, here it is. Not early on. It was mid-January against Utah. I believe that was the overtime comeback win where Werenski scored both goals. He allowed 2 goals on 34 saves. Like, he had really good performances at random points in the season, but he just wasn't good enough. It was a real, he was putting wins together sometimes, but his individual goaltending just was not happening, right? I can't imagine a world in which this organization is happy with how the goaltending went. And if they do bring back, like, I've talked a lot about how it doesn't make sense to retool the defense and also bring back Fabro and Provorov, right? Because it does feel a little bit like just rolling back the same group as last year and hoping that something different will happen. But even more so, it feels like bringing back that goaltending duo of Elvis and Tarasov is just kind of malpractice. Do I think it's a fireable offense? Not necessarily, but it does feel insane to me. And obviously, this is not like it's not confirmed happening. It's not unconfirmed happening. Like, this is me just kind of throwing stuff at the wall. But if it does happen, like, man, it's going to be really tough to have confidence in anything else Don Waddell does if he looks at the goaltending last year and it's like, yeah, this seems fine. The Blue Jackets managed to outscore a lot of goaltending woes this most recent season. My guess is that the goal scoring probably reverts back to normal a little bit this upcoming season. Hopefully the defense improves. The goaltending has got to be better than it was, because the goaltending was the worst part of the season by far. And I know that we had struggles with the defense, but for my money, the defense was much improved. The goaltending was sometimes great and sometimes just truly unwatchable, right? Like, what was it? Again, I talked to Jeff Sabota about this last month, the month before. When we basically said that Elvis had, like 10 of his games, he allowed under 2 goals in a game. And for, like, what was it? Like 15 games, 15 of his 53 games, he allowed fewer than 2 goals. And 15 of his 53 games, he allowed more than 6 goals, Like, how can you go into, again, like, that's, again, sometimes that is a case of outscoring your goaltending woes, but, like, God, it's a frustrating way to watch hockey. And Don Waddell, for whatever his faults are, I don't think he is stupid enough to bring back that goaltending team. So we'll see what happens. But the overarching point of this whole episode, really, is I don't think the goaltending is going to be the same as it was last season. It can't be. Regardless of what Tarasov is saying, like, I don't see a way that they bring back the same goaltending. Like, it feels like, again, I use the word malpractice, which is probably a little bit strong, but that's what it feels like to me. So we'll see. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Blue Sky over at Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. Thank you once again for making it your first listen of the day. We'll be back tomorrow with a brand new Locked on Blue Jackets. Maybe we'll get to talk about Dmitry Voronkov, finally. But until then, make sure you stay locked on.